So far in this unit, we have solved quadratics by square roots and by factoring. We're going to do a third method of solving a quadratic, which is called completing the square. Recall perfect square trinomials are in the pattern square, double square. So if I take the square root of this, I could get ax. If I take the square root of this, I would get b. And if I take axb and I multiply that by 2, I will get that middle term. Same thing on this one. Square root of that is ax, square root of that is b, and then if I multiply the axb times 2, I'll get that middle term. Notice that middle term can be plus. If it's plus, you put a plus here. And if that middle term is a minus, you'll put a minus in here. So that is our perfect square trinomial pattern. So let's practice factoring these in terms of a perfect square trinomial. Let's see if they are perfect square trinomials. This first one, get x. The last one, I get 3. And then if I take 3x times 2, I get the 6x, which is my middle term. And so this is a perfect square trinomial, and that's going to factor into x and 3, so it's those two values, and that's going to be squared, and then the middle term is a plus. On the next one, that's a square, so square root each of those. And then I'm going to take that 5x, that product, and double it, so I'm multiplying by 2. That does give me the 10x, which is my middle term. It's a negative this time. So I'll have an x and a 5 in the parentheses. That'll be squared. And then my sign that goes in here is a minus. On the next one, I have square root of 4x squared, which is 2x. Square root of 1 is 1. And then if I take that product, so 2x, and I double it, I'll get 4x, which is my middle term. It does have a minus, so that means there'll be a minus in here. And the 2x and 1 go in the parentheses, and there's a square on the outside. On the next one, this is 3x. Square root of 4 is 2. And if I take that product, which is 6x, and I double it, I'll get 12x, which is my middle term. This is a perfect square. So this is 3x, 2 squared, and the middle sign is a plus. We're going to use this pattern now and solve by square roots. This x squared plus 6x plus 9, notice we just factored that above, so I can go ahead and write that that was equal to x plus 3 squared equals 36. And now to undo the square, you square root both sides, so this will be x plus 3 equals plus or minus, and the square root of 36 is 6. Move the 3 to the other side by subtracting 3 on both sides. So x equals negative 3 plus or minus 6. And I can simplify this further. Negative 3 plus 6 is positive 3. And negative 3 minus 6 is negative 9. On the next one, we did factor this one above here. So I'm just going to copy what we got above. So that factored into x minus 5 squared equals 1. And now square root both sides. So x minus 5 equals plus or minus. The square root of 1 is 1. Now I'm going to add 5 to both sides. 5 plus 1 is 6. 5 minus 1 is 4. And there are my two solutions. We did not factor this one yet. Let's just double check it's a perfect square. That's x. Square root of 144 is 12. And 12x times 2 does equal 24x. We have a minus here, so we'll just need to make sure that we put a minus between our values. And that's squared. And that's equal to 100. Square root both sides, so you have x minus 12 equals plus or minus 10. Add 12 to both sides. So x equals 22, 12 plus 10, or 12 minus 10, which gives you 2. Let's find the values that make this a perfect square trinomial. So notice this middle term was doubled. So if I undouble it, I'm going to take 18 divided by 2. That will give me 9. And then I square it. And so that will be what C equals. And so for bonus, if I wanted to write this as a perfect square trinomial now, this would be x plus 9 squared. It's just half of that middle term that goes here. On this one, to find C, you take half of the coefficient and square it. So that will be negative 10 squared gives you positive 100. So C would equal 100. And for bonus, if I want to go ahead and write this as a perfect square trinomial, it's just half of that goes inside here. So it would be minus 10. On this one, to find C, you take half of the coefficient and square it. So that will be 3 squared, which is 9. And so this will be, half of that is 3. And that's a plus that goes in there, and that's squared. Or you can just take the square root of that to put that number in. You'll still have to look at that middle to get your sign. On this one, take half of negative 10 and square it, which gives you 25. So square root of 25 is 5. Square root of that is x, and notice that's a minus between them then. So you can either take half the middle term to put here or take the square root of that. And then just make sure that you're pulling the correct sign on those to put in between your numbers in your binomial or your values. Next page. We are ready to complete the square. The first step is to create space and get x terms alone. So this is x squared, this is a minus 10x. They both have an x term in them. The 1 does not. So I'm going to move that to the other side. And then I'm going to create a perfect square trinomial. So I take half of my linear term and I square it. So half of negative 10 is negative 5, and then when I square it, I get 25. So I'm going to keep this balanced and add 25 to both sides. This now becomes x squared minus 10x plus 25 equals 24. And I want to factor that. And so this is a perfect square trinomial. So square root of that is x, square root of 25 is 5, and the expression has a minus between them then, and that's squared, equals 24. So I could take half of the negative 10, which is negative 5, or I can square root that and put the 5 in there and take the sign. And then to solve this, I'm going to square root both sides. So I have x minus 5 equals plus or minus the square root of 24. But I'm going to go ahead and look ahead. I noticed that a perfect square goes into that. So I'm going to write 24 is 4 times 6. move the minus 5 to the other side. So I'm going to add 5. So this will be 5 plus or minus. And I can pull out that 4. Square root of 4 is 2. And that's going to be a 6 then. I guess I already did that next step on this one already. So your final answer, if you want it as an exact answer, is negative 5 plus or minus 2 square root of 6. If you wanted to actually find a rounded value to see where that value would be on as a solution, you could. Or if you had this set equal to y and you were graphing it, you could. Let's try another one. I have x squared plus 6x minus 4 equals 0, so I want to create space and get the x terms alone. So I'm subtracting 4 from both sides. And then I want to make a perfect square trinomial. So I'm going to take half of my middle term, my linear term, and square it. So half of 6 is 3, 3 squared is 9. So I'm going to add 9 to both sides. This is now a perfect square trinomial, so that's going to be x plus 3 squared. So square root each of those, take the sign, or just take half of that and put in there. This is equal now to 5. Square root both sides. And then I want to get the x by itself, so I'm going to subtract 3. And that is an exact answer. Of course, you could find a rounded one if you want to. Let's try one more. For this last example, notice I have a 5 in here in front of my x squared. That's not a perfect square. So I have to look at this and notice they have a greatest common factor. So I'm going to divide that out. And 0 divided by 5 is still 0. So I can get rid of that 5, and now I have something nice to complete the square. I'm going to move the 3 to the other side, so subtract 3 from both sides. I want to take half of my middle term, which is 1, and then square it. 1 times 1 is 1. This is now a perfect square. Either take the square root of that or take half of that term. There's a plus that goes between them. Take the square root of both sides. And then I want to get x by itself, so I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides, plus or minus. 2 is not a perfect square. However, I can pull out the negative, which will give me I square root of 2. So this one has 2 imaginary solutions.